Warning: the following video contains graphic depictions of historical torture. Some viewers may find the material deeply disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. What if your last moments were spent with a cage of starving rats strapped to your stomach, their only way out being through you? This wasn't dreamed up for a horror movie. For some, it was a terrifying reality. This is the story of rat torture, an agony so profound that tyrants have used it for centuries to break not just the body, but more importantly, the mind. Before we go any further, a warning is necessary. The material we're about to cover is graphic and deeply disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The idea behind rat torture is hideously simple. A victim is tied down, and a container, open at the bottom and holding one or more starved, frantic rats, is placed on their bare skin, usually the stomach. Then the top of the container is heated. Fire, hot coals, or a torch would drive the trapped animals into a panic. Their natural instinct is to run from the unbearable heat. With metal on all sides and fire above, their only escape route is down, through the soft flesh of the human victim. Using their claws and teeth, the rats would burrow into the person's body, tearing through skin, muscle, and organs in a desperate attempt to survive. For the victim, the result is an agonizing, slow, and psychologically shattering death. This method was a uniquely cruel mix of psychological warfare and physical torment. It turned one of our most primal fears against us, making a small animal into an instrument of unspeakable horror. It's a journey into the darkest capabilities of the human imagination, with a history written in blood across empires, revolutions, and dictatorships. So, why rats? Of all the creatures in the world, why did this one become such a feared tool of torture? The answer is buried deep in our collective psyche. For thousands of years, rats have been our unwanted companions, thriving in the shadows of our civilization. They are symbols of filth, decay, and disease. Historically, no animal is more connected to pestilence. The Black Death, the devastating plague that swept through Europe in the 14th century, has long been associated with rats who carried infected fleas. They became a living symbol of a merciless, unstoppable death. While modern research suggests human fleas and lice may have been more significant in spreading the plague than once thought, the cultural memory is unshakable. The rat was seen as a harbinger of doom, scurrying from the sewers to deliver sickness and despair. Their very nature adds to the terror. Rats are smart, tough, and relentless survivors. They can chew through wood, plastic, and even soft metals. This ability to gnaw through anything is precisely what makes them so horrifying in this scenario. They aren't predators like a lion. They're scavengers and burrowers. The fear they inspire isn't of a quick kill, but of a slow, unclean violation. The idea of being eaten is terrifying enough. The idea of being gnawed on and burrowed into by an animal we associate with plague and rot takes the horror to a whole new level. The torturers who came up with this method knew this perfectly. They weren't just using an animal. They were using a symbol. The very presence of rats in a cell was its own form of psychological torment, a promise of the agony to come. The sound of them scurrying in the dark was enough to start breaking a prisoner's will long before the physical torture ever began. This universal, primal fear is what makes rat torture not just a method of inflicting pain, but a masterpiece of psychological cruelty. The twisted genius of rat torture lies in its simplicity and adaptability. The core idea was always the same: use a panicked animal to inflict pain. But the methods were tweaked across different cultures and eras, each refined for maximum terror. The most infamous method involves strapping a victim to a table or the floor, abdomen exposed. This complete helplessness was a key part of the psychological torment. A heavy, open-bottomed container, a metal cage or an iron pot, would be placed on the victim's stomach, with one or more large, hungry rats inside. Then, hot coals or a torch would be applied to the top of the container. As it grew scorching hot, the rats inside would become frantic, clawing at the metal bars to no avail. Eventually, their desperation would lead them to the only surface that would give: the victim's flesh. The agony would be immediate. The victim would feel the frantic scratching of claws and the piercing pressure of teeth. Driven by heat and terror, the rats would gnaw their way downwards, burrowing through skin, fat, and muscle. It was, in effect, a living dissection. The victim would be conscious as the animals entered their abdominal cavity, tearing through intestines and vital organs. Death, when it finally arrived, would likely be from blood loss, organ damage, and septic shock. The entire process could take hours. There were other variations. It's been reported that in India, prisoners were sometimes forced into baggy pants tied at the ankles. Rats were then poured in from above, trapping them against the victim's legs and groin, where they would bite and scratch in an attempt to get out. And then there's the legend of the Tower of London's Dungeon of the Rats. The story goes that a particular cell was located below the high water mark of the River Thames. As the tide rose, water would flood the pitch-black cell, bringing with it the river's rats. Prisoners left here would be trapped in total darkness, with unseen creatures crawling over their bodies, never knowing when teeth might sink into their flesh. While there's little hard evidence to confirm this dungeon was real, the legend itself shows how deep our fear of these animals runs. The practice of using animals to execute people is ancient, but the specific use of rats has a particularly dark history. Some accounts trace the idea back to the Roman Empire and the infamous Emperor Nero, whose name is synonymous with cruelty. While stories claim he used rats to torture prisoners, there is no solid historical evidence that he used the specific heated cage method. His reputation for monstrous creativity, however, shows a clear precedent for using living creatures as instruments of suffering. The most historically concrete chapter of rat torture, though, comes from the Dutch Revolt in the 16th century. This 80-year war for independence from Spain was brutal, and a Dutch nobleman named Diederik Sonoy earned a reputation for exceptional cruelty. Sonoy was an ally of William of Orange and was tasked with rooting out Spanish loyalists. He pursued this mission with a chilling zeal, and his preferred torture method was with rats. Historical records from the time document Sonoy's method in grim detail. Prisoners would be stripped and restrained. Instead of a metal cage, Sonoy would use a simple clay pot or bowl, placing it upside down on the prisoner's abdomen with starved rats inside. Hot coals were then piled on top. As the pottery heated up, the rats, driven mad by the rising temperature, would desperately gnaw into the very bowels of the victim to escape. Sonoy's use of this torture was a calculated tool of terror. The sheer horror of the method often meant a confession could be pulled from someone before the torture even reached its fatal end. The threat alone was often enough. Sonoy's cruelty became a dark legend of the Dutch Revolt, cementing the image of the burrowing rat as one of history's most ghastly forms of torment. If you're finding this exploration into the darker side of history compelling, take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We're dedicated to uncovering these forgotten stories, not for shock value, but to understand the full spectrum of the human experience. Rat torture didn't stay in the history books. In the 20th century, this medieval horror was resurrected by some of the most brutal military dictatorships in South America. During the Dirty Wars from the 1960s to the 1980s, regimes in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Uruguay reportedly used rat torture as a tool of political repression against students, intellectuals, and anyone suspected of leftist views. Under dictators like Augusto Pinochet in Chile, the method was adapted for a new, sinister purpose, not just to get information, but to inflict profound psychological and sexual humiliation. According to survivor testimonies and reports from human rights organizations like Amnesty International, torturers developed new, even more invasive variations. In Argentina, one method detailed in the CONADEP report was called the rectoscope, a tube used to insert live rats into a victim's rectum or vagina. This was reportedly reserved primarily for Jewish prisoners, adding a layer of anti-Semitic cruelty to the act. The testimony of survivors is harrowing. Nieves Aris, a woman tortured under Pinochet's regime, gave a detailed account of her ordeal. In a letter smuggled out of prison, she described how her torturers would bind her to a table and force live rats into her vagina. She later learned the explicit goal was to make her sterile by infecting her. This wasn't just about pain, it was about destroying her identity, her future, and her humanity. Amnesty International also documented the case of another woman in Chile in 1981 who was held in a room filled with live rats during her interrogation, a pure act of psychological warfare. In these 20th century dungeons, the rat became a symbol of the state's power to invade and destroy a person from the inside out. It sent a message to all dissidents. No part of you, not even the most private spaces of your own body, is safe from us. To really grasp the horror of rat torture, you have to understand the physical destruction it causes. This isn't a quick or clean death. It's a drawn-out biological nightmare. It would start with the heat from the container and the frantic, desperate scratching of the trapped animal. The first breach of the skin is an explosion of pain as the rat's sharp incisors tear through the epidermis. Its claws would rip at the surrounding flesh, digging for a hold. Once through the skin, the rat would burrow into the fat and abdominal muscles, causing immense pain and bleeding. The victim, fully conscious, would feel every single rip and tear. The real damage begins when the rat breaks through the peritoneum, the membrane lining the abdominal cavity. This is where things become fatal. The cavity holds vital organs, the stomach, liver, and intestines. As the rat tears into these structures, it causes a cascade of fatal problems. A perforated intestine is a death sentence. It spills highly toxic bacteria and waste into the sterile abdominal cavity, leading to peritonitis, a massive, excruciatingly painful infection. The victim would experience a swollen abdomen, fever, and overwhelming pain. At the same time, the gnawing would likely sever major blood vessels, causing catastrophic internal bleeding. The victim would bleed out internally, leading to a rapid drop in blood pressure, shock, and organ failure. Death would be a slow dance between bleeding out, succumbing to infection, or the body simply giving out from the unbearable pain. The victim would likely be conscious for much of it, a helpless witness to their own internal destruction. As devastating as the physical effects are, the true power of rat torture was always psychological. It was engineered not just to kill the body, but to annihilate the soul. First, there's the dread. Torture is a process, and the moments leading up to it are a huge part of the horror. A prisoner would have heard the stories. The sight of the restraining table, the cage, and the rats themselves would trigger an overwhelming flood of fear. This waiting period, knowing the agony that's coming, is its own form of torment. Once the torture begins, it's a full-blown assault on the senses. The searing heat, the sound of scratching claws against metal and then skin, the squeals of the panicked animal, and of course the feeling, the weight of the cage, the squirming creature, and the indescribable sensation of its teeth breaking through the barriers of their own body. This sensory overload is designed to overwhelm the mind, leaving room only for raw terror. But the deepest layer is the absolute helplessness and violation. The victim is tied down, unable to fight back or run. This total loss of control is a fundamental attack on a person's identity. The body is forcibly turned into a trap and then an escape route. It's a violation of the most intimate boundary there is. The psychological impact of being devoured from within is shattering. For anyone who survived, the psychological scars would be permanent, likely leading to severe PTSD. In his famous case study, Sigmund Freud wrote of a patient he called the Rat Man, who was consumed by an obsessive fear that his loved ones would be subjected to rat torture. This shows how the very idea of this torture can lodge itself in the psyche and become a source of lasting torment. It's a cruelty so absolute that it often broke the mind long before it broke the body. From the rumored sadism of ancient Rome to the cold, systematic dungeons of 20th century dictatorships, the story of rat torture is a chilling look at the dark side of human ingenuity. Its power was in its horrifying simplicity, turning a creature that's already a symbol of fear and plague into a weapon. We've seen how Diederik Sonoy reportedly used it to crush his enemies, and how modern regimes in Chile and Argentina allegedly adapted it into a tool of political and sexualized terror. The method's real horror is its two-front assault. It inflicts unimaginable physical pain, a slow, conscious process of being eaten alive from the inside. But it's the psychological attack that truly defined it. The dread, the sensory nightmare, and the profound violation of being turned into a living tomb were all designed to strip away every shred of dignity and break the human spirit. Looking at something this gruesome isn't about morbid curiosity. It's a necessary act of remembrance. It's a stark reminder of the depths humanity can sink to when power goes unchecked. By understanding these dark chapters, we arm ourselves with the vigilance needed to recognize the patterns of dehumanization and ensure such atrocities stay in the past. It honors the victims by refusing to forget what they endured and strengthens our resolve to build a world where such cruelty has no place. Thank you for joining us on this difficult but important journey. If you believe in understanding these stories, please consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into history. What are your thoughts on this? Does the psychological or the physical aspect of this torture strike you as more horrifying? Share your reflections in the comments below. We read every one of them. And if you found this video informative, please give it a like and share it to help others discover this history. Thank you for watching.